Eduardo, who's sitting here, asked me to organize a discussion, and as I had written a text for one of the Moose publications called What is the Public, I chose to make it public and give it the same title. So the title, What is the Public, is a tentative point of discussion, or the starting point of this afternoon's discussion, which I think is relevant, especially in the case of institutions too, that are quite prominent. And in my case, also, aside from moderating this panel, I'm also curating the Berlin Biennale, which is a very special case. So I'll say a few words about why this title, and then I think we've chosen to go for brief statements from Matthias and João, and then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll open the discussion up for your questions. The only thing I would say about the Berlin Biennale at the moment related to this afternoon's title is that the Berlin Biennale is symbolically relevant but practically irrelevant in Berlin. And this is a conclusion I arrived at by the fact that the funding comes from the state, federal state, but no money comes from the city. So in a sense, the city itself doesn't think the Berlin Biennale is. And in this sense, it's an atypical biennial, which usually are started to give a city prominence or some sort of, but in the case of the Berlin Biennale, it's never really worked out that way. So with that in mind, the relationship that it has to the public is already undercut by this strange relationship it has to the city officially. Let's say there is no official relationship to the city. And at the moment, one of the things that occupy my mind is to imagine ways in which you are interacting with citizenship or the residents of Berlin in ways that are perhaps direct and also indirect. So you cannot expect every person in Berlin to go to the Biennale, not even to know about the Biennale. But you can maybe try to make the issues that a Biennale raises public enough that everyone is made aware of them. So this is the situation with the Berlin Biennale. In terms of the institutions and their public, or what is the public, the essay, when I wrote it, and I really can't remember if this was still the last line or not of this essay, but I finished the essay in the first draft by saying that the public is the phantom limb of the culture industry, by which I meant that it's there, but it's not really there. It's putting pressure on the body, but it's not really clear how this pressure is affected from this construction that is the public. And we're not talking anymore about the actual public, but also the word or the concept of the public. So tonight, or this afternoon, what I want us to discuss is more this symbolic function that the public exerts on contemporary art institutions and on museums as well. So maybe we start with João and then Matthias, if that works for you.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Miart, for the invitation. And it's always very curious when we come from institutions to an art fair to discuss what is the public. And it's very curious because we don't think really our public is the public of an art fair, but it is also. But at the same time, when we work in an institution and we are in an art fair, also we don't see ourselves as part of the public. And one of the main differences between us coming from an institution and people visiting an art fair is the fact we know where these works are coming from. There are many others. And we work directly with the artists, usually, to build the knowledge about their works. and the public coming to an art fair has always the idea that they're living in a unique situation, having an exclusive access to a very unique situation to access these artworks. But there is also, in our times, a big ambiguity between some situations like art fairs, because art fairs are replacing also the salon, and the public thinks he can find in an art fair the state of art. And the public cannot find in an art fair the state of art. This is a big mistake. That means the public can find the state of the market in the place where the art fair is happening. And for example, I'm working with an artist from Milan, preparing an exhibition with an artist who lived and worked in Milan, Luciano Fabro, and I suppose there is not one only work by Luciano Fabro in the art fair. That means an art fair brings me information not about what happens or what happened in the artistic scene in Milan. It gives me information about what is the market in Milan today. This is different. But this is not the information the public has access, really. The public doesn't understand that. And one of the big problems with the public is the public has no access to the context of the information the places of art are providing to it. And this happens more and more when the public is made of people who are not looking for art, but the public is made of people who are not looking for art. That means the public of institutions are more and more people who pretend to be in one place to say they were in this place. For example, I work in a museum owning one of the few artworks attracting millions of people a year, Guernica, in Reina, Sofía, as a sort of a Mona Lisa effect, of course. But and we tried in the collection to organize a context of knowledge for to experience Guernica and to know more about Guernica. But at the same time, we know the context we provide does surpass this pressure to be in front of Guernica, just to be in front of Guernica and to say to everywhere they were there. This sort of touristical approach to the place of art is something that is dominating the circuit of the public through the art biennials, through art fairs, and for the public, art fairs and biennials become also in some way differentiate too. There's salon, and the institutions in the middle of that, they become like monuments where to be, like to visit the Eiffel Tower. That means this is, of course, an ethical problem for everybody to be in the museum, because we suffer, firstly, from a political pressure and economical pressure to have public. Today, there is no possible institution without a public. We have to show to politicians, to the economical powers who are supporting an institution, we have a public. And we contribute to educate a public. And this is the other problem. What we do, what the public we have. One of the problems is to have public, the second problem is what to do with it. When we think about what to do with it, there is, for example, a very interesting lecture by Nicholas Serota, the director of Tate, saying the big challenge of the art institution today is to think about what sort of relationship the institution builds with the public. A relationship based on information or one relationship based on the experience of the artwork. I feel this dichotomy is quite poor. Institutions are not facing a dichotomy between information and experience. The question is not to add information about work or to not add information about work. The question is not to oppose information to the experience of the work. But Serota talks about knowledge, not about information. But the big problem is precisely in art institutions today, art institutions replace knowledge by information. And there is this need for extra information everywhere in our society. And when we get more information about something, we are more excluded from the knowledge and from a critical approach to something. An example of that is the fact all of us know in museums people have much more time reading the labels and the museum texts than to experience the artworks, often. And all the museum organizes a sort of pedagogical approach to and build some terrible pedagogical discourses about the works. It will be one day necessary to analyze the quality of the educational texts in museums, to approach people to the work, but they're not approaching people to the work. They're precisely diverting people from the work, and they're imposing a singular, a sort of mainstream approach to the work. And this is the problem, because what is beautiful with the reception of an artwork is the fact we can be together thinking differently about it. And to explore the difference is much more interesting than to uniformize the reception. And institutions today with the public, they're in some way trying to answer this need of a massive audience, imposing also a very poor discourse on the artworks in a way to uniformize the approach to the artwork. This is, for me, a big ethical problem we face in institutions today. Also because, of course, we don't want to face one big problem referring the public. Frantz Fanon, in a very interesting text from the 60s, was saying the spectator is either a coward or a traitor. And we know yeah, a coward or a traitor. And of course, the fact people assume themselves as spectators becomes the first problem. That, and art in the 20th century was in some way confronting, and since the 19th century also, and maybe in all its history, was always confronting this idea of a spectator. That means the spectator pretends, and the spectator as a sort of heritage of a bourgeois reception of art, of the salon, for example, wants information about art. Not really a personal confrontation with art, but information about art. And museums and art institutions provide information about art. Art fairs provide information about art. But the principle or the possibility or a knowledge situation becomes much more difficult to build, because a confrontation with the artwork is also to put in question our lives, our experiences, our knowledge, the idea of knowledge we had before. And this is the sort of confrontation today in a spectacle culture where the public becomes really a sort of consumer of the situations the institution provides. This becomes a very difficult challenge. That means when the institution organizes the information to make the public feel comfortable in the institution, and this is one other problem, institutions should research more to make the public uncomfortable in the institution. And not comfortable, because today institutions, for example, consider the public on a very childish way. It's not casually. For example, many art institutions you visit today start with a place for kids. You arrive to the institution and you have in the lobby a place for kids. You arrive to Beaubourg or to Hangar Bicoca, is like that, for example. Yeah, and often it looks like that everywhere. But because really institutions want to make the public comfortable like children in a school. And to approach the artwork is not comfortable. Knowledge is not comfortable. It's something that confronts ourselves with what we were. And that confronts ourselves with something else we should be to knowledge and to experience that artwork. This is a big problem we can find in the idea of the public, but also the fact the public is treated that way in some way originates a sort of invisible vendetta of the public, because the public really doesn't enjoy so much to be treated on this very childish way. And if he is treated that way, he reacts considering the institution is always a sort of terrible result of theories of conspiracy. For example, the public never understands why the institution presents these artists and not other artists. The public never understands the discourse of the institution. The public never understands why some artists are well succeeded and other artists are not well succeeded. The public never understands how an artwork was made from one idea and not from a skilled technical approach to a procedure, for example. These are some questions the art institution that in these last 20 years, in these last 100 years, was not able to answer. And when the public does understand that, the public thinks the institution is, or the art fair or the biennial, becomes the result of a theory of conspiracy where there are lobbies building this hidden knowledge the public doesn't understand. And when they face that, of course, they think that some people getting rich and powerful because of this hidden knowledge they have or they share between themselves. And we can say any similarity with the reality is not a pure coincidence. Often they're right.
Okay. Yes, I'll pass it on to you, Matthias. But first, I want to know what's the first thing that a visitor finds when they enter the Lenbachhaus in Munich? Because, you know,
the cash desk.
It's the same in the Reina, Sofía, I believe.
No, it's good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Eduardo, Juan, thank you very much for inviting me. I have 3 points, and maybe I can have my first image. First is like the perspective we're talking from. Like we said, we're talking from a perspective of popular art museums in Western democracies attached to capitalism. I think that's really, there's really a need to say that. And I would say my first point is we have to defend that things or institutions or whatever are still public. And I chose this image to make the difference between inclusion and exclusion. The people in front and behind these VIP separation. For example, it's overlapping to what João was saying, but we have a huge professional art world. Thousands of collectors, artists, curators, friends, family, whatever. It's really big, and they are always invited. They have VIP cards, they have VIP passes, they have VIP badges, they have these professional preview cards, whatever. They are really included in what the art world wants to tell. And then we have the people who are coming when all the curators and collectors are leaving, and that's maybe the public. And then we make another separation. We have these silver membership cards, the gold membership cards, the platinum membership cards, because they are supporting the museum. They join a club of friends of the museum. It's like in an aircraft. You have these people sitting in the first class, then you have the business class, and then you have the economy, and even there are separations of sitting really in the back next to the toilets or in front and having a good view to your monitor. And I think that is something which now gets into institutions. These art world separations, they enter public institutions, and we have to defend public institutions from these separation. That's my first point. And my second point is, maybe I can have some of the images coming. When I grew up, I had no idea what a curator is. And the word curator didn't mean anything to me. And when I studied art history, curators were not existing. It's an Anglo-Saxon word, and you know, Germany is the nation who founded art history, and as a discipline, as an academic discipline. And the word curator was not existent. There were huge and big reviews in newspapers about exhibitions, but they never mentioned a curator or something. So I finished my studies, and there was people we adored in the 80s when we were young. And that was bankers and stock exchange agents, like these Bret Easton Ellis novels. Do you remember American Psycho? Like bankers and stock exchange manager, very cynical figures in the center of the capitalist world. These were people we adored. And this changed. Bankers are really hated because they are responsible for the financial crisis. And now, who stepped in? In the center of capitalism, there's a new figure rising, and that's the curator. It's going to be this, they moderate the capitalistic world. Not only in the art world, they're now spreading out. You can go to a record shop, and they're curated shelves with vinyl records. You can go to a department store, they are curated things of you choose your Magella fashion, and then they sell you a super stereo amplifier to that Magella jacket. It kind of fits, and you can have the records in the back, which are cool. So the curator is now the figure moderating, and really it's a capitalist figure now. And I chose these things we did in Lenbachhaus. It's a monopoly play, you know, Monopoly, where you buy hotels and everything, and you're accumulating real estate, like hotels, and then people come and they have to pay because they get on your street. And it's, you see, that's the Monopoly thing. That's the woman who makes you play, and that is the chorus who sings you the cards you get. And instead of accumulating real estate and money, what's the center of the capitalist world is, we try to show there's another way to accumulate things, and you should, as a player, you win if you have an orgasm. So you accumulating sex and orgasms instead of real estate and money. And it's all inspired by Beatriz Preciado's contrasexual manifest, which is like about how to get orgasm in a nivelated world where sex doesn't play any role. There's only sex via dildos, and there's only anal orgasms. So we try to invite as many of the public we have in the city and play Monopoly with them. And instead of offering them to accumulate money and to learn about capitalism, we try to share the knowledge about orgasms, for example, as a way out. So I think that we have to rethink the role of a curator as a figure moderating the capitalism. And my third point is, and that has to do with audience. I hope that is clear, because a curator is hired to create an audience and to think about the audience. And the audience is a fetish. Like, it should be young, it should be migration background, it should be this, it should be this. It's always a fetish, the audience and the public. And my third point is, we are sitting in these big institutions, in these successful art institutions, and we are really super successful, like Reina, Sofía and the Städtische Galerie, but only in numbers. We are super successful, we are super professional. Like we do blockbusters, we have 400,000 visitors for one exhibition in 3 months. We have the art historian tools, we have the logistic tools, we know how to do a blockbuster. We know how to run a museum, we know how to acquire the best works, we know how to raise money, we're super professional. But on the other hand, we have no idea what a museum should be in the future. Nobody, and I never met somebody, we're just guessing, we just make experiments, and that's really good, but I think, does anybody have a clear vision of what the public should be, of what a museum should be, what the role in future of a museum should be, what people should come? And it could not be, and that's what Juan said, that everybody should come. That would be terrible, like if the public would be everybody. Because in the football stadiums, the football manager don't say, oh, the old ladies, super highly educated, who always come to these Kandinsky and Klimt retrospectives, why do they never come into our football stadium? Or we should get them in, they should see our football, our soccer matches. Like, we should accept that the public is only something where people are excluded and included. Thank you very much.
Great. Actually, few months ago, we're noticing that architects now choose to make stadiums rather than museums. We thought maybe there should be a new movement to make contemporary art stadiums. At least they have a number of seats, so the audience situation could be controlled. You can only have 80,000 visitors at a time, not 1.2 million, or I don't know how many people go to the Louvre, but what I do know is that it has the biggest conservation department in the world, because the works are actually melting from the condensation of people's sweat going through the museum every day. But still the expectation is that more people come in, or more people come in and leave happy, as you were saying. And this is a pressure that is being put on basically every. So you know, the Berlin Biennale is a small project compared to the Preußische Kulturbesitz, which manages all the Prussian heritage in Berlin. The budget and the scale of the Biennale is minimal, but still the number of visitors that come to see it has to grow and grow and grow. So then I was thinking, just as you were speaking, how do we distinguish or if we can make a distinction of these publics? Maybe we have an immediate public and then the public at large, so that we have something that that refers to the people who always come, who actually already want to come to the institution, and then the institution should be satisfied with this number or these people. It doesn't have to accord to a number. But then what is the relationship? Can we think of a different relationship to the larger public? You know, that doesn't need to necessarily come to the institution. You know what I mean? It's like first and third public, a public that is present and a public that is aware, but not necessarily coming to the institution. And so this is one question I throw out there for discussion. And the other one is tying 2 points that you were making. One is the curator, and the other one is the knowledge broker. So the curator is the broker of knowledge in a certain way, is what you both were saying to some extent, is the role that you can end up in as a curator in a big institution. You can decide what kind of knowledge should be presented to the public next to each of the artworks. And in this sense, you are the person who would be in charge of organizing this communion between the institution and its public. And in a certain way, it's a function more than a. From that point of view, the curator is a function and not really a free agent, is more or less what you were discussing, and also what, in terms of Nick Sorota's paper or presentation João was saying. So you have, you know, I mean, we could go for specific questions too. What are people informed when they? I actually have not visited the Guernica in many, many years. I have no idea what is said to the when you go in there. What do people read, for example? You know, what is told, or is the painting one of those paintings that are so perfect that it can just be there with any information next to it? You know, that people, like the Mona Lisa, you don't have anything. You just have the painting. There is no, you know, what do you call that, feature or something. Anyway, you already...
You said, like, we decide what knowledge we want to share with our audience and the public. Yeah, but there is already an exclusion. You have to pay an entrance fee. You have to speak not only the present language, but you have to understand these language of the art world. You have to pay 30 euro for the catalog. There's always exclusion, and I think it's about we as public museums have to care about the audience in terms of that everybody could be included if he likes to be included. And I think we have to put really a lot of energy into that project. For example, like now on the Lenbachhaus website, you have a free download for the catalogs, for some of the catalogs. Like they're free for everybody as an e-book, and you can read them on every gadget you might have. And even if you want to have a printout, you can come to the museum and have a super cheap copy printout. We have to reduce the price of the tickets. We have to create the public as something where everybody could include it. And then comes the knowledge that we share. So if we don't, if we exclude the people, we cannot share the knowledge.
Yeah, that's true, but the fact that, in terms of what João was saying, if you're already, the sharing of knowledge can also be, or is actually, in my opinion, the strongest point of exclusion, because people will pay, I don't know how many, 25, 30 pounds to go see Madame Tussauds wax collection. You know, it's not like people will not pay to get the museum. It's also, once you've paid, once you've agreed, okay, I pay, I come into the museum, to feel that you have to be informed thoroughly about each of the works, because you yourself cannot develop your own autonomous relationship towards the works. Then you have this point of exclusion, which is the one that is the art world, contemporary art world especially, is mostly criticized for, you know, for constructing elaborated discourses, presenting them before the works, so that in order to access anything, you first have to feel ignorant. Then you might be able to glean 3 or 4 words from the text. Then you know you have a full biography to read before you can come back to the museum and look at this artwork again and maybe get it. But perhaps this is also an erroneous approach to the public, and I think this is more or less part of what you were meaning when you were saying the public has to feel more uncomfortable, you know, not received and carried through the museum, but perhaps asked to engage with it, free or not, you know. But,
you know, there is an old sentence, a very classical, old-fashioned sentence by Marx, saying the dominant culture in a society is the culture of a dominant class. And museums and art institutions are not excluded from that, in my opinion. Sometimes, often we forget that. For example, in terms of inclusion and exclusion, we can, of course, organize several systems of inclusion in a museum. For example, in Reina Sofía, we have 2 hours a day where the museum is free. This is very nice for people who want to access to the museum. But we know that millions of people in Spain and in the world who don't know, they have the right to know the artistic creation of their time or of the past. They don't know about that, and they're excluded in the society from that knowledge. And a system of school, a system of education, does compensate that. And the museums, as part of today's system of education, system of spectacle, don't compensate that, of course. Museums don't change societies. The society is what it is. We can use some space in the social space to make things more fair, but we don't. The revolution doesn't start in the museum. It happened only once, you know, in the Soviet Revolution, and after it ended very very shortly. But the fact we don't think really about the knowledge we provide to the public. And we don't think about that because also the reception of the artwork in the 20th century depends on a system of legitimation. And this system of legitimation was changed by the artists. This was very interesting. Duchamp, after the ready-made, changes the system of legitimation of an artwork. The artwork is not anymore legitimated by an audience or by a system of power, but it's legitimated by the other artists. And institutions in the 20th century, they share this utopia. Many of our colleagues, some of our historical colleagues in the Städtische, in the Museo, Pontus Julten in Bourg, etc., they wanted to have a museum for the artists. And the first audience of a museum would be the artists. And it was this first audience that changed the concept of a museum between the 50s and the 70s in European institutions. European institutions were in some way a result of a welfare state where the artist was having a direct access to the museum and to the decisions of took in the museum because the curator was in close contact with the artists selected for the collection and for the program of the museum. But this is over. This is over today because museums today are part of another sort of society. The welfare state ideas were surpassed by the neoliberal ideas, and in some way we're commenting this before our talk started. Museums are also tools for social anesthesia today. The museums are places where people can think they can be integrated in society, but in the same time they live society as it is, of course. And the fact we can make a sort of domesticated access to the museum and to impose some information, because this is another question, that museum directors and museum curators don't think really about the information they provide to the public. The education service, they think a little bit about that. But the directors of the museum curators don't think so much about that because they're in direct touch with the artists don't care about that. And that means education has this big problem. How to provide information without to have this information system dominating the possibility of an individual knowledge. One exhibition should be made for one only person. And how to give this space in the museum to preserve and to enthusiasm people to think differently and not to react the same way to an artwork. This is the biggest challenge a museum has to face.
Matthias?
Yeah, maybe we have examples of that. One really bad example and one really good example. I leave it to you what is the good one and what is the bad one. However, we have the Matthew Barney movie, 6 hours long, and not everybody can see it. It's these limited seats. You have to go to an opera house. You have to watch the movie for 6 hours. And only the people get in who got invited by the gallerists or the museum or who had the chance to get a ticket. So, and Matthew Barney in an interview says, I don't really care about the audience. I care about the experience. I have to give people an experience which is something, which means something for them. And then we have this last show of Susanne Pfeffer before she left the Kunstwerke, that one-to-one. You have to enter little rooms and it's one artwork and one audience, one visitor, that's the word, yeah. And you can experience the artwork alone, one-to-one, as long as you want. And of course, this show didn't have many visitors because you had to stand in line. But on the other hand, I said these are two models which are neoliberal. There's too much on the market, so I have to reduce the objects I can sell so that people have more desire, like what painters did in the 19th century. Yeah, you have to wait until you get a portrait of mine. I have too many I have to do within the next months. And so people had to wait in the 19th century to get a portrait of Lenbachhaus or somebody. So you're reducing the people, and that's capitalist. So, but of course I would share this moment of that we have to care about the experience, that this is something which really gives you whatever that is, knowledge, fun, it could be everything, or enlightenment, or whatever. But, yeah.
I mean, I'm going to ask now if someone has a question from the audience before we go on. How much time do we have left? 2 is what I need to know. It's supposed to be over. Any questions? For 15 to, I don't know, we have 15 more minutes.
I actually agree with what Mr. Fernandes said about the fact that the public needs to be uncomfortable when going into a museum. Because if you give too much knowledge, so it's also a selection of knowledge, you haven't to give too much to the public. Because if you give the public audio guides, tablets, or all these legendas, then the public is more interested in reading, in listening, in experiencing the tablet, rather than experiencing the work face to face. That's really what happens all the time when I go to exhibitions and I see people reading or or see the picture on the tablet, rather than having this incredible experience of facing the artwork face to face. So it's really a problem of not only the selection of knowledge, but also which medium you provide knowledge. And also the difficulty nowadays, our virtual society, in a society where we filter, everything is filtered, experience is always filtered, to have still the unique experience of going into a museum and having this individual experience of face-to-face with the artwork. So it's not really a question, just really think that I would like to be more uncomfortable in a museum rather than curated through the...
No, I think that Mr. Fernandes was very clear when he was stating the difference between information and knowledge, between education and information. So basically he's drawing, for what I understood, a frame in which he's stating that museums provide inverted commas information, pre-elaborate information, rather than generating knowledge. Now, to generate knowledge, he also referred to the, let's say, golden 2 decades where Ponty-Sultan and Fauchereau and many other very important curators directed the Centro Pompidou and etc., giving the artist and making the museum the place of expression of the man and its time. At that time, of course, you have very illuminated, enlightened curators, which, like Derrida proposed, were tracing the bridge between the artwork and the public. The problem is also that many times curators tend to substitute the function of the artist. So I think a more fair dialogue between artists and curators would be of profit, of benefit, both for the public and both for the art scene. And now, just to finish the very simple idea I got in mind, I think that very important Garcia Lorca last play was, if you remember, called The Public, and he didn't finish it. So that's what I just...
The curator. We have to find a new word.
Well, it's that, of course. It's, I never read the last play by Garcia Lorca, but yeah. But now I'm curious. Thank you for that. But it's really curious to think about theater. Maybe your point about the theater and about this this reference to Garcia Lorca last play called The Public can be very interesting in a way to awaken others possible reflection. The nature of the places for art and the nature of places for theater, for example. Theaters were changing according to different social systems. Of course, the Scala is not the same thing of the Opéra de la Bastille, for example. Many things happen in society that made difference the Opéra de la Bastille to the Scala. But it's very curious to think this sort of democratization of the theatrical space is not really corresponded by the nature of the architecture in museums. Because the nature of the architecture in museums today, the evolution of the museum today, the museum before was in some way a translation of this mythology of the temple. The Louvre was still an example of that, and the Louvre was the first public museum. But today the museums become monuments, and architecturally the museums become a monument to the system of power that builds the museum, not to the public, not to the artists, but to a system of power that builds the museum. And this is more and more evident when the museum becomes again a museum for a system of power, because we had in Europe, and this was very important, the illusion in the second half of the century, the museum could be a result of this. The museum was in some way one of the best moments of the welfare state history, because it was a space for freedom, really. And this is what allowed the museum directors to make museums for the artists' works, and for museums as working space for the artists too. But today museums become corporate, and they become corporate not only in the financing system of support, but they become corporate in terms of spaces, where you have different spaces, as Matthias was saying, for the sponsors, or for the public. You have different classes of the public defined by the architecture of the museum, for example. The new museums, the new architectures of museums are corporated and are not democratic. And the new museums being built today in the world are being affected by that. The museums in the Middle East, for example, or even the return of the museum as a Puritan temple for art. A good example for that is the DIA, for example, in New York. It's also very curious to see how an institution that promoted ephemeral temporary art in the public space in daily life had to make a temple for its collection and close it in some way its activities, promoting new forms of art for new artists in the daily life of New York.
I mean, I have a number of points to make, but not enough time to go and make all of them. But I don't know if you wanted to say something before. So, no.
First, the audience, if there are any questions.
Since we talked about collections as well, and revisiting collections is so important for museums today, I thought, why don't we talk about also timing? Since when we see, I mean, information versus experience, it's also important to understand the timing of these exhibitions. I mean, when you revisit a collection, then it's going to be installed for many maybe 2 years or so. While when you deal with temporary exhibitions, I mean, times are pretty, pretty more densely. It's like 4 months or something maximum. And I think also this is important when you think about how to manage information, right? As a museum, like Museo Reina, Sofía, how these politics for the public change when you deal with a collection and when you deal with temporary exhibitions or temporary installations, for example?
For example, in Reina Sofía, we have a fantastic advantage referring our colleagues in other museums. We are protected by our collection. The fact we have a work like Guernica, and it's very beautiful to have a painting like Guernica protecting the curatorial freedom of an artistic direction in a museum, you have already solved something the system of power in the society wants from the museum. Numbers, statistics about the audience. That means we have millions of people every year. The museum got more than 3 million visitors last year, for example, coming mainly to see Guernica and the Picassos and the Miros and all what made the mythology of Spanish art in the 20th century, of course. But what we do with Guernica, for example, this is the question. And for example, in front of Guernica, we decided to ask the Prado. For us, it's very important to think the museum not as an isolated place, but a museum as a possibility to connect collections and other institutions. And for example, the first thing Manuel Borja Vilel, the director of the Reina, did was to ask Prado for the Goya's disasters of war. And in front of Guernica, you have the Goya's disasters of war. I feel you don't have to explain to the audience why they're in front of Guernica. I feel the audience is not stupid and they will understand. It's not like, for example, in some museums, I arrived to a place where there was, for example, a Giacometti and Barnett Newman, and the museum educational service was explaining this was about the vertical, and this was because why the artworks were together. And I feel we don't have to explain these sort of things, because the audience is not stupid. But also, surrounding Guernica, it was important to show the context of the Spanish Republican Pavilion. And we reconstituted the works existing in that pavilion. And in this pavilion, there were very avant-garde works, like Picasso's work, Alexander Calder works, Miro works, etc. But they were very reactionary works, and in terms of form, like the social-realistic works about the horror of war, too. And this is something you have to confront to understand what was that time, of course, and what were the conventional language in confrontation also in that time. Even when they were together in the same ideological space, for example, as the Spanish Republican. At the same time, we decided to tell the history of the artists who were in that pavilion. And we have a room, for example, about all the artists who were in exile after the defeat of Republican Spain and with Victor of Franco. For us, and we have even a replica of the pavilion, and we are providing also information about the propaganda of the Spanish Republic at that time. All this is a system of context, a system of knowledge after. This does solve everything, of course, but this is a point of view, and this is an interpretation of a context, and I suppose museums must be very clear on that. There are no limits to the need to explain why we are presenting one artwork to the public, why we are putting 2 works together in one wall, why we are putting 10 works together in one room. There are no limits for that. Museum directors, museum curators have always to develop systems of discourse, systems of reflection about that. And museum must be a place for research and for reflection too. But the problem today is museum curators and museum directors have their time much more busy with the financing of the museum than with the research or the building of systems of discourse on what they are doing. And this is the other problem, the museum becoming a sort of new consequence of an economy where the corporate museum imposes also a way of working inside the museum. And inside the museum, what is happening today inside the museum is one of the less democratic systems of work existing in our societies. And people should know more about that.
This would be actually a great statement in the end, but I need to be critical. Why is it so that Reina Sofía is so successful about the collection, and why do people come for the collection? And Lenbachhaus is the same. People come because of the collection, not because of the exhibitions. Because we need just one image which is iconic for art history. For example, the Centre Pompidou, the collection is fantastic, but people don't come for the collection because there's not one single iconic painting in the Pompidou. The Pompidou once asked us to consult them what painting that could be, which could be identified with the Pompidou. We have the blue horse, the red spot, and you have the Guernica. This is created because there was a marketing machine from the beginning on working on these paintings. Guernica is a traveling painting. It has been in Hamburg, it has been like 6 or 7 exhibitions in Germany. It traveled all over the world as a marketing tour for that painting, and of course for the ideology. And the same with our painting. It traveled from the beginning on. The artists, the museum's director, and the curators, they created these iconic knowledge about these paintings.